Welcome back to the course on analytical problem solving. In this very first module, we are going to be looking at understanding how humans think, make choices, and act. This is the foundational module for this all-important course. As we introduced in the earlier video, this course looks at two major concepts of analytical thinking and creative problem solving. These are very important skills in today's place of work and business, especially in the light of AI automating routine responsibilities. What this means is that a lot of roles that were previously handled by human beings are now being done by machines. That leaves us the room for human beings to take up more critical responsibilities that machines cannot automate. In order for humans to be more critical in their responsibilities, in order for humans to take up more critical responsibilities, it is essential that they are equipped with certain skills that enables them to deliver on their jobs more effectively. And that is why this course has become very important, not just for middle and senior management roles. Even entry roles now require a level of decision making. So it is important that people who are beginning their careers understand how to think in an analytical way and be able to come up with solutions that are effective in addressing problems. For every day of our lives, we make decisions, from choosing what we eat in the morning to determining if we want to go into business or build a corporate career. All of these decisions are shaped by how we think and what we believe to be rational. Now you begin to ask yourself, what exactly does it mean to be rational? When we talk about rationality, we are talking about how human beings reason, why we make the type of choices we make, how we can think about the choices we make, and how we think, whether in regular ways or in structured ways. In this module, we are going to be looking at how humans think by default, and then we are going to be comparing it with how should human beings actually think when they want to make an effective decision. This module is going to unravel the fact that a good decision making, it's not about how intelligent you are. It doesn't rely so much on your experience. Instead, your approach and the process you take in making a decision determines whether that decision is going to be good or suboptimal. As we move along, begin to think about this course as not just a theoretical course this time, but a practical journey that will impact your life, your personal life, your corporate life, or your business life. This course is going to give you some skills that will enable you get a level of clarity about what you think about your career, how you make choices about your business, how you make even personal choices of who to marry and not to marry. We are going to be defining rationality. You will understand what it means to be rational. We are going to be looking at the different types of rationality you have and their limitations. And then at some point, we are going to introduce the structured ways of looking at decision making and why it is important that you begin to take decisions in a structured manner. By the end of this module, you understand the importance of context and why you should establish criteria in decision making. There are lots of examples and practical scenario-based questions within this module that will enable you to begin to apply some of the concepts we are going to be discussing here. Now, thinking about rationality, when you say a decision is rational, or the way we normally say in our day-to-day life, as someone is rational or irrational, what exactly do you mean? Can animals be rational, or is rationality limited to human beings? Do animals think just as humans do? Think about when you are taking a walk with your dog in the evening and you are about to cross the road. As a human, you look left, right before crossing the road. Your dog also takes note of moving vehicles before crossing the road. The fact that both of you perform that same action, does it also imply that both of you think alike? Now, there is a clear difference between humans and other animals. Foundational biology has taught us that the basic difference between humans and other animals is the fact that human beings have the ability to reason deliberately, whereas animals' behavior is informed by their instincts or the way they have been conditioned based on past experiences. Now, how do human beings look at problems? How do they look at problem solving, decision making? When a human is about to make a decision, they have the ability to look after alternatives and compare the options available to them. Unlike animals, humans are able to consider the consequences of the action, consider the consequences of any of the options they want to pick in their decision making process. And then it is important to also point out that human beings have the ability to reflect, to think about what they want to achieve, to think about their own personal value system, and they're going to infuse all of these thoughts in their decision making process. Animals cannot do any of this. Their thinking is limited to their instinct and how their mind has been conditioned based on prior experiences. So, when you say you are rational, or your decision making process is rational, or your behavior is rational, what exactly does it mean? In simple terms, it sounds like, does this thing make sense? What I'm about to do now, does it make sense? Some people will go the extra mile of saying, does this make a logical sense? So for a decision to be rational, it has to be logical. It has to be coherent. It has to have a linkage between what you want to achieve and the process of achieving it. It has to fall in line. So in making a decision or in making a choice, you need to establish a clear objective of what you want to achieve and then follow a process that is in line with what you want to achieve. It is at that point that you say, this is logical, this makes sense as I'm doing it. A rational decision is informed by data, is informed by fact, and not intuition or imagination or pure emotion. It also has to be goal directed. It should be focused on a particular goal. You need to follow an effective path towards achieving that objective that you have in mind. So, a rational decision has to be logical. It has to be informed by empirical data. It has to be goal directed. It has to be focused on achieving a particular goal. Looking at rationality of humans, substantive rationality is talking about perfection in reasoning. It assumes that when a human wants to make a decision, they go for the best, absolute best. They make a decision that best serves their purpose, that maximizes benefits for them. There are certain key assumptions we have under substantive rationality. And one of them is that when you are making a decision, you have all the information you need to consider your options. That is, if I want to, for instance, as a young man, I'm about to begin a career and I'm trying to choose between, maybe try to choose between jobs or try to choose between getting paid employment or starting a business. Substantive rationality assumes that at the point that I'm taking this decision, I have all the facts, I have all the information that I need to take this decision. It also assumes that for each of the options that I have before me, all of them are logical and consistent. It also assumes that for all the options that I have that I'm considering, I know and understand the consequences of picking either of the options. There is also the assumption that I have full mental capacity to understand the different scenarios and be able to pick the most effective option from amongst all of them. But if you begin to think through all these assumptions, you will realize that in reality, there will be limitations to some of these assumptions. Now, think about this. Have you ever bought something that is expensive, even though there are cheaper options available? Think about that moment that you drove from your house and went to a mall to buy groceries instead of moving into a nearby store before your house or within your street. You prefer to go to the mall where it is likely you are going to buy that same good at a higher cost, and you're also incurring cost of that travel between your house and the mall. If you think about this in the light of substantive rationality, which assumes that for every decision you make, you are going after the option that is the most effective for you at the time, that is the absolute best at the time. If you think about it, you will notice that sometimes you make certain decisions that are not absolute best in your context. And that brings us to bounded rationality. Under bounded rationality, we acknowledge that there are limitations to human reasoning. There are limitations to the amount of information you have to make a decision. Sometimes, when you want to make a decision, you do not have all the facts that you would need to make an effective choice. Data can be a limitation. You also can have limitations in time. There are certain times that you are expected to make spontaneous decisions. Something just happens and you are expected to make a choice within a space of time. It could be in minutes, it could be in a few hours. You are expected to take a stand. Also, all humans are not the same. Our understanding are different. Our ability to process things are also different. So our mental capacity is also a limitation. Certain times while you are making a decision, you may not fully understand the options you have before you. You may not fully understand the consequences of the options before you, and that itself is a limitation. Then there also is your emotion. When you are happy, when you are sad, how you solve problems within those two emotions will be different. How you view things when you are happy versus when you are not happy will be entirely different. So these are limitations. Bounded rationality acknowledges that as a human, while making decisions, you do not have all the data you need. You do not have all the time in the world to consider the options. You do not have, you may not have the mental capacity to fully understand what is before you and then be able to take effective decision. And then your emotion is also a factor. So what this means is that in some occasions, you go for an option that is good enough rather than the absolute best. Good enough means to the best of my ability, this is what I think is good for me at this time. You may not always achieve the absolute best in your decision making because there are these limitations with the information you have, with time available for you to take that decision, capacity, and the emotion. So, in some instances, what you make as a choice is what is good enough at the time. Then, let's look at this example. Frank is a young graduate who is living in Lagos, Nigeria. He has three job offers, one in tech, another in banking. Then there's also an offer from an NGO. He has only 24 hours to make a choice from amongst these options. Which one should he choose? If you are Frank, which of these options would you choose? You have 24 hours, limitation in time. Which of these do you think he would choose? If you think about this decision making, if you think about this problem that is before us, you would already begin to see a lot of limitations. You begin to see some constraints in Frank's ability to make an absolute best choice. What he might be able to do in this instance is a good enough choice based on the limited data that he will have, time, his mental capacity to process these differences, and then depending on how he feels at the time, all of these are going to play a role in how he makes a decision of what to do. Procedural rationality focuses on the process of decision making. It looks at the steps, the shortcuts, and the biases we use to reach our conclusions. Now, let's look at some common cognitive biases in decision making. The first one we are looking at is anchoring bias or anchor bias. This is when you are making a decision based on the first piece of information you have. Your mind is fixated on the first information you have, and you're making a decision based on that. Your mind is already anchored on the first data that was presented to you. I will give you an example. You walk into a mall to purchase an item, and you see on the tag of the product clearly written was 50,000 naira, now 35,000 naira. Was 50,000 naira, now 35,000 naira. Immediately you see that piece of information, your mind immediately, because you've seen 50,000, from 50,000 discounted to 35,000, it already makes it feel like this is a great deal, or you're getting this at a massive discount. At that point, you may not even consider that the actual price of that product may actually be 35,000 naira. The actual price of the product might be 50,000 naira. A good marketer will say, price 100,000 naira, discounted to 50,000 naira. Because you've seen 100,000 naira, a big sum, and you're now seeing that same product discounted to 50,000 naira, you already feel like this business is doing you some good. You may not at that point realize that the actual value of that product is 50,000 naira. It might even be overpriced. That is anchor bias. The next bias is availability bias. This is when you are overestimating the likelihood of something happen because of an example that will easily come to your mind. I give you a typical example. You constantly or you recently saw on the news about plane crashes, lots and lots of plane crashes. And now you want to make a journey and you are scared of flying because in recent times you've heard about lots of plane crashes. Your mind is already biased towards flying because you begin to think, might crash as well. At that point, you might not be objectively considering the fact that road travel might be riskier than actually flying. That is availability bias. You are amplifying the fact that crashes happened recently and you're bringing it into your reality and you're fixing your mind on that. That is blurring your ability to make an informed decision at that point. You're already biased towards flying. Another bias is status quo bias. Simply put, status quo, you want to remain with what you know, with where you are. Your mind is fixed on the present. You prefer things to remain the way they are. You are resisting change. I give you an example. In the place of work, you could see employees resisting to adopt a new software because they're already comfortable with the one they are using. That is status quo bias. Because you're already used to a particular way of doing things, an introduction of something new feels like pressure, feels like unnecessary burden. Then we have confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when you seek information that confirms what you already believe. You already have something in mind. You already have something you believe. And then you are going out to seek more information that confirms that thing you already have in mind so that you say, yes, I said it. These are biases that could prevent you from making informed decisions, both in your personal life, in the place of work. Or now, having talked about what rationality is, the kinds of rationality, and the limitations you could have in making a decision, and now most recently talked about biases that could becloud your sense of pure reasoning, let's look at two ways of thinking, or what we call dual systems of thinking. There are two broad ways people think. One is called system one thinking. This is the fast way of thinking. It is automatic, it is emotional, it is intuitive, very spontaneous. Immediately, that's your default. Fast thinking or system one thinking is driven by your habit and past experiences. If you accidentally touch fire, what do? You immediately remove your hand. Immediately, you do not wait a split of second to think about whether you should remove your hand or not. That is system one thinking. It is spontaneous, automatic. It is relying on your past experience because you've touched fire before, you understand what it means. So once you touch it again, your brain remembers, I have touched this thing before and it can hurt. Then you immediately remove your hand. For system one thinking, you are quick to judge and act. Everything happens very fast. The second way of thinking, system two thinking, is slow thinking. This is a logical way of thinking. You are more careful about what you do, about the options you consider. You begin to analyze each of the options. You begin to think about whether it makes sense or it doesn't. You begin to think about how these options can help you resolve the particular problem you have in mind. And this requires some effort. It requires some thinking. You need to be very conscious of what you are doing. It is not fast. It is not quick. It is not spontaneous. You are slow. You think about it. You make an effort. You make considerations. So because of this, it is slower. And because it is slower, you have the tendency to be more accurate than when you are quick to judge and act. Two simple examples we are giving for both ways of thinking. For system one thinking, think about jumping out of the way of a moving vehicle. For system two thinking, when you want to make an investment, you don't just wake up and pull your money and put into an investment. You consider the options. You weigh the consequences. You think about the probability of success and failure. You make all these considerations logical, you even make consultations. You put in an effort. You take your time to do it with the hope that you achieve a level of accuracy. Now, it is important for us to mention that you can't entirely rule out system one thinking out of your life. And also, system one thinking is not entirely bad. Instead, what we are saying here is not that system one thinking is bad or it should be ruled out. We are saying that when making decisions, we should be more deliberate about our approach to decision making. We can't entirely rule out system one thinking, but we can train our mind to pause for a while and let your slower thinking process take effect. You pause and allow system two thinking to consider the options to evaluate the decisions you want to make. So both systems of thinking are necessary, but system one often dominates us without realizing it. And this is also why even smart, intelligent, educated, and experienced people make mistakes in decision making. It happens when we are not able to control our system one thinking. In order to make better and effective decisions, we should be intentional about applying system two thinking in our decision making process. We can't always control our instincts. We can't always control how we react, but we can train our minds to pause and then let System 2 thinking take its course. Why is structured decision making important? Why do you need to use System 2 thinking in approaching decision making? Why should you follow a structured path in making a choice? It is important because this structured approach gives us the opportunity to use data to solve a problem. Because you are more deliberate, you are conscious, you are putting in effort, you have the opportunity, you allow yourself the opportunity to gather data that you apply in decision making. It also allows you the time to ask the right questions. Then you are able to focus on what matters because you have the opportunity to compare the options. You have the opportunity to think about the logic behind the decision. You have the opportunity to weigh the options you have before you and then make very important considerations before you move on. If you follow a structured decision making process, the outcome will be more transparent and those decisions will be dependable. You can trust it because at each point in time, you understand the process you took to come up to that decision. Having talked about the importance of using structured method of decision making, let's now dive in to look at the steps decision making. Let's begin to look at that structured decision making process. What does it entail? There are 7 key steps in structured decision making. The first one is exploring the context, understanding the story of the problem. What is this story about? Then from there, you define what exactly is the problem. But you are getting to the root of the problem. You are no longer looking at the problem from the surface. You are getting to the root cause of the problem. When you define the problem, you set your objective. This is the problem. This is what I want to achieve. Your objective has to be clear. It has to be measurable. It has to be specific. It has to be attainable. Your objective needs to be very clear. Having set your objective, the next is to look at what options do I have to solve this problem? What options do I have to arrive at this objective that I have set? Then, having established the alternative that you have, you begin to look at criteria that you need to consider in choosing either of the alternatives. What important factors do you need to consider in picking which of the alternatives is a better one? By the time you list the criteria, then you begin to analyze them and then see how each of the criteria matches either of the options or alternatives that you have outlined. When you do this analysis, it becomes clearer which of the options best serves your need at the time. Then you can make your decision and then implement the choice. Now, we are going to get deeper into understanding the 7 steps in structured decision making process. Before we dive in, let's look at this example, which we are going to be reflecting on as we look at the structured process of decision making. Frank is in a financial crossroad. He is a bright graduate, very ambitious for success, but he's currently broke. And he's looking at deciding his path to financial freedom. Should he look for a job to attain stability, or should he learn a trade for quick income? Or should we go for a further degree, which will give him long-term value? One key consideration is his family's financial future, which depends on the option that he's going to choose. This is the problem before us. How can we use a structured decision-making process to address this problem? We said in the 7 steps of decision-making, the very first one is exploring the context. What does exploring the context mean? Exploring the context simply means understanding the problem, understanding the situation, understanding the limitations the decision maker has, understanding the environment. What are the circumstances of the decision? So you're going to be asking yourself, who is involved? Who is this problem about? Then what are the environmental factors? What are the pressures or opportunities that you have? Then, in exploring the context, you'll be asking questions like, what values or emotions might influence the decision? Is this problem a personal problem? Is it affecting somebody that is dear to you? How does your value system or emotion come into play in that decision-making process. So you have to start with exploring the context, understanding who the problem is affecting, understanding the circumstances of the problem, understanding the opportunities you have before you. Having explored the context, the next thing you must do is to define the problem. You need to create a problem statement which clearly states what the issue is. The problem statement must also say, where is this problem happening? Where may not necessarily mean a geographical location. It could be the circumstance of time. It could be contextual. You need to establish, where is this problem happening? When is it happening? This talks about timing. At what season of the year is it happening? At what time in the life cycle of the company is this problem happening? At what point in the history of an organization is this problem happening? So the when is about timing. Then, very importantly, who is involved? Who is this problem about? In the example that we gave, in the case that we read before looking at these 7 steps, who is the problem affecting? It is Frank, who is trying to make a choice of whether to go for a further degree, whether to start a business, whether to go into paid employment. He's in a dilemma. He wants to make a choice. So Frank is the person involved. What is the issue in that his instance? What is the issue in the instance of Frank's example? The issue is Frank is seeking financial freedom opportunity. Where is it happening? When is it happening? Why is this important? Why is this important? And then, how is it unfolding? These are the questions that you have to ask yourself, find their answers, use their answers together. It forms your problem statement. These are called the 5 W's and 1 H of problem statement definition. Very important. And like we've mentioned at some point in the past, if you're not able to clearly define a problem you want to solve, you should not jump into looking for solution to that problem. Until you clearly understand the problem you are solving, looking for its solution might be a total waste of time. Or you might be looking for a solution that is not the real solution to the problem you have at hand. So it is important that you're able to define the problem before you start talking about the solution. The third process in the structured decision-making process is setting the objective. You need to be very clear on what you want as a solution for the problem. It is one thing to know what the problem is. It is another thing to know what the objective is. I've seen the problem, but what do I want to achieve out of this problem? What do I want to achieve out of the problem that I have? It needs to be clear, it needs to be specific, it needs to be documented. You need to clarify what success looks like for you. So when we talk about the objective of your problem solving, we are talking about, what does success looks like? How do I know that I have solved this problem? That is what success looks like. What will it look like when I have solved this problem? So it needs to be clear. It should be a clear goal. Your goal should be very clear. If your goal is not clear, you might be solving the wrong problem. And that will be waste of valuable resources. The next thing is begin to consider options. You have to list out all possible options that come to your mind, all ideas that come to your mind to solve that problem. You need to list them out. At this point, you shouldn't rule out any option. All options should be considered. List all the options, even if it doesn't seem to make sense at the time. List all of them, consider them later, and then you can rule out the ones that are not fit. Then you set evaluation criteria. For Frank that is trying to decide on what to do with his life, whether to go for a further degree, whether to get a job, or whether to go for further studies. Yeah, I mentioned further studies, get a job, or start a business. In taking that decision, there are important factors that for Frank, in taking that decision, there are important criteria that Frank must consider in making a choice. The alternatives are already before him. One of the alternatives is to either build a business, another alternative is to go for higher degree, another alternative is to get a job. These are the alternatives he have before him. But in deciding which of them is the most effective decision that he can make, he will have to consider the factors that affect the three of them that will lead him to the decision he wants to make. Think about things like financial benefit out of either of the option. That is a factor. That is a criteria. Then family considerations. Is Frank a married man? Does he have children? Whatever choice he's making, he will have to consider his family in that equation. Then, for each of the options he wants to pick, is there room for growth? Which is very important. It is going to be a criteria. He's going to be considering, can I grow on this job? Can I grow in this business? Now, the next step is to analyze and compare alternatives. Having looked at the different factors you need to consider in making your decision, you begin to attach weights to each of them in the order of importance. In the same example that we have, we listed out 4 criteria. These different criteria will determine the decision in different degrees. For instance, Frank might consider the financial benefit from either of the choices as the most important thing he wants to think about. As he's thinking about this decision, there should be a key thing that he has in mind to resolve, and that is where he's going to attach the most point. Then you are going to add weights to these criteria in order of importance. In this case, Frank is considering the financial implications of either of the options. If he wants to start a business, he will be needing money. If he's going for his master's degree, he'll be needing money to fund it. If he's looking for a job, all these have financial implications. So Frank might decide that the one that has the highest financial implication, he will attach the highest weights to it, and then apportion different weights to other ones. And then for each of the criteria, you are going to rank how it leads to a particular choice, either option A or option B. How does financial outcome relate to option A or option B? In Frank's case, he's looking at traveling. In Frank's case, he's looking at either getting a job, building a business, or going for a further degree. So which of these 3 options has the potential for the highest financial outcomes in terms of benefit? Which of these have the highest benefits? That is how you determine how you rank these options in line with the criteria. We'll get a chance to do this in practice, and you begin to appreciate what this is all about. Having analyzed and compared alternatives, the next you will do is to select the option. So questions normally come. It is important to follow this structured process for decision making. Why it is very important that you carefully explore the context and define the problem, set your objective, and assess the different alternatives that you have. It is important that at the end of the day, you must make a decision. You must make a decision and implement that choice. Now, we are coming to the end of this module on understanding how we think, choose, and act. Before we wrap it up, let's quickly glance through some of the very important things we've discussed in this module. The first is that decision making, it is about the process you follow to make that decision. It has to be systematic. It has to be structured. A structured process will help you overcome emotional and cognitive bias. If you follow the path of structuring your decision-making process, it helps you to manage emotional outbursts. It helps you to regulate how you feel about certain things. The 2 systems of thinking that we discussed, both of them actually complement each other. Like we said, you can't totally rule out system 1 thinking. It is like a default. System 1 and 2 thinking, they complement each other. The goal at the end of the day is to balance intuition with analysis. Why it is empirical and advised that you base your judgment on data, it is also important that you are open-minded enough to understand that there are contexts to every situation. Every decision you make must start with a clear problem statement. If you've not established your clear problem statement, then you should be doing so. Every decision should start with a clear problem statement. That is the basis. You must first of all understand the problem you want to solve. Clearly understand the problem you want to solve. It is very important to do so before diving into decision making. And finally, on this module, you should always remember that people's realities will be different. And what decisions people make in those different realities will also be different. So, having that in mind, you should always look out for context. Best decision making is all about the structure, it's all about the process. It's not anything fanciful about your intelligence, but more about understanding a structure and following it. As we come to the end of this module, I want to thank you for following through to the end of this module. The next module, in the next module, we are going to be looking at how smart people still make bad decisions. In the beginning, I hinted that effective decision making does not rely on your intelligence or experience. Instead, it relies on your ability to stay disciplined. In the next module, we are going to be looking at how smart people make bad choices. How smart people make bad choices. It's going to be an interesting module, and I can't wait to see you on that one.